How do I get good at art?
Objection!
Just copy? That sounds way too easy. That can't be true. Maybe you've tried copying lots of things, but it just doesn't seem very effective. But it's true. All I did to improve from this to this was copy. But not just any old copying. It's more specific than that, and you have to be thinking a certain way. In fact, I'd say being able to copy in this way is one of the most important things you can learn to improve at art. But first, before we talk about that, why copy at all? There's a few reasons for that. For one thing, copying forces you to really observe your reference. There are things you'll miss if you're just looking, but copying forces you to observe every single detail because, of course, you're drawing it. And also, it helps you remember what you looked at. When I was in school, I spent a lot of time writing things down because it helped me remember them a lot better than just reading. And it works the same thing for drawing as well. If you spend longer on it and spend time actively working on it, it helps you remember better. For the same reason, if I notice anything when I'm copying the reference, I like to make notes as well. Then this bump here is the tibial tuberosity. What comes around here then? Lateral epicondyle of femur. I better write that down. My memory's really bad, so this step is really important for me. Maybe you're better than me and you don't actually need this step. But remember, you don't want to just copy. Like I said, there's more to it than that. When you're copying, you need to be mindful. What does that mean exactly? It means that while you're copying, you actually have to engage your brain. It's the same as when you study anything else. You can't just autopilot and passively consume when you're trying to learn something. Some people have told me that they get confused when they try to learn art. They buy books and other resources because other people tell them to. But then what are they supposed to do with that book? Do they just read it and somehow they'll be a better artist?
I know Kung Fu.
Well, not quite. You want to start mindfully copying some of the diagrams and illustrations in the book while you read. And okay, I know I keep saying this word mindfully, but what does it actually mean? And I think the easiest way to show you is to give you an example, so let's do that. I've been studying anatomy for a little while now, but I've mostly been focusing on the upper body, which makes sense. Most illustrations focus on the upper half of a character. You don't need to draw legs if you just crop them off your illustration or just make sure they're always wearing loose pants. Well, today, this comes to an end. I'm gonna finally learn how to draw legs. I was also putting it off for a long time because, well, just look at this. It's just a leg. Why does it have to be so complicated? But I know I can't procrastinate forever, so this is how I approach learning the anatomy of the leg. Okay, step one is to actually learn the thing. It's just me in shambles because I can't draw the knee. There's no avoiding it. I'm sure I can't remember them all right away, but I'm gonna try my very best to at least draw all these annoying little muscles. And how do I do that? By copying, of course. But before we copy, I need to find something to copy. There's a 3D model of an écorché from Sketchfab that I often reference for my anatomy studies. I left a link to it down in the description. And of course, real life is the best reference because you get the benefit of true depth perception. However, using real life as reference requires grass touching, which is obviously impossible for me, so I like using 3D models instead. You can kind of feel the depth by rotating it around. I take screenshots of it from lots of different angles and just start copying those screenshots and force myself to pay attention to every muscle as I draw by labeling them. A lot of people ask me, but learning the names of the muscles isn't compulsory, but I personally find that it helps me remember them. I take special care to pay attention to how different muscles and bones look like from different angles. Okay, time for step 2. Once I finish studying what reality looks like, it's time to create a mental model of my subject. What is a mental model? It's basically a simplified version of reality that I can actually remember and use while drawing. Because, you remember how I said that real life is too complicated? I don't know about you, but this is too much. I can't remember it all. It's better to have a simpler model that you can remember, rather than a complicated one that you keep forgetting. The most important thing is that your mental model is usable for you. It can be as simple as just having some cylinders, for example. And as your knowledge grows, you can update your model and add new information. For example, here, you can start defining the sartorius muscle on the thighs. Mine looks something like this. I think I got most of the muscles on there, but there are a few muscles I like to group together because they usually aren't too distinct. For example, here I like to group all the adductor muscles together. And I don't bother remembering the itty-bitty little muscles like the peroneus or any muscle that begins with the word flexor or extensor, because I hate those ones. They're way too complicated. That includes the ones in the arms. By the way, you can actually skip step 1 if you use another artist model and copy that instead. But personally, I find it super useful to actually develop your own. That way, it's perfectly tailored to your needs. I also think that there is value in consciously making the decision to simplify certain muscle groups. In the end, you know they're there, it's just that you don't feel like drawing them, that's all. Okay, so now that I have my mental model, it's time for step 3, drawing from reference. Learning all the muscles is super cool and all, but I don't just want to draw skinless characters, so I need to learn how things look with skin and fat on top of them. Once again, it's time to copy. I look for references for how legs actually look in reality. Of course, real life and photos are fantastic for this, but I really like 3D scans in particular because I can study them from lots of different angles, which helps me understand the 3D form better. While I'm drawing, I often ask myself, what is this supposed to represent? What's this line supposed to be? What is this bump? And if I'm not sure, I just check my references to figure it out. I make sure my brain is engaged the entire time so that I don't autopilot. I'm copying it while making observations. I'm like, oh, there's a line here. Then I think, okay, what's making that line? Then I realize, oh crap, it's the gracilis. And then I'm like, okay, what's this lump? Oh crap, that's the soleus, right? I don't copy anything without knowing what it is. And I also try to draw lots of different angles and poses. After I finish copying something, to check if I did it mindfully, I like to ask myself, so what did I learn from this? And if there's even one thing, then I did a good job. Hooray! Okay, are you ready? It's time for step 4, the final exam, sorta. Can you actually remember everything that you learned? It's time to draw from imagination. Okay, side note, this is optional. Not everyone wants to draw from imagination, but it's still a good test of your knowledge. Kinda like when I used to study for exams, I'd copy from the textbook, cover it, and then try to write it down without looking. It's the same idea. And remember, when you do this, do not autopilot and draw as you always do. Slow down, try to apply that new knowledge you just learned. For anatomy in particular, I find that a great way of doing this is to force yourself to sketch out every single muscle. You can erase the lines later if you want. But since this isn't actually an exam, if there's something you forgot, it's not really a big deal. You can always check your references again. It's just a way of figuring out how well you actually retained the information you just studied. Look, okay, I don't know about you guys, but my memory is super bad. When I do this sort of thing, I actually kind of forget most of it. So if your memory's as bad as mine, what can you do? If I forget, I just study it again. What, you thought this was my first time studying the legs? No, definitely not. I did it before. I just forgot everything. I mean, look, the body is really complicated. There's so much to remember, so it's perfectly normal that remembering it all takes a lot of time. I've lost count of the number of times I've studied the same thing over and over and over. But every time I do, I remember just a little bit more. The more you study and the more you revise, the deeper it gets etched into your memory. So don't stress out too much if you forget. It's just part of the process. Okay, so hopefully at this point I've convinced you that copying mindfully is a good thing. So if you want to copy, you need to find references to copy. Where do you find them? I gave a few examples, but here's a bunch of places you can find more references for anatomy in particular. Of course, there's always Google Images and Pinterest. They're simple but pretty reliable, as long as you remember to dodge all the AI. For photos, I really like buying reference packs from Graphite Studios. These reference packs are also super useful for figure drawing in general. Because I'm also a massive fan of 3D models, here's a couple of places I find them. I often go on Sketchfab and just use the 3D model viewer. There's also Pose Maniacs, as well as Bodies in Motion and Anatomy 360. When it comes to books, I really like Anatomy for Sculptors. A lot of diagrams you saw throughout this video are from this book. So go forth and start copying. Remember, you don't always have to copy mindfully because I know it can get really tiring to be activating your brain all the time. Remember to take breaks. It's totally fine to switch off and relax sometimes and just copy for fun. If you found this video helpful, try copying the subscribe button, mindfully, of course. Thanks for watching and catch you next time. Bye-bye. Wait, okay, don't start yet. Okay, the VTuber's a bit too big. Okay, there we go. croissant.